Fedora, the bastion of cutting-edge free software, has just released Fedora 31. Here's my review on Fedora, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Get ready to free your mind.
Free your mind.
Alright, welcome to Free Your Minds, the show about Linux and free software made easy for the everyday user. Everything that you would need to know practically about Linux and free software you will find on this show. That being said, before we begin this review, I'd appreciate it if you could like this video and do subscribe if you want to see more content like this, both in tutorials, reviews, and a couple of my thoughts on the Linux open source world and just what's going on out there in the world, trying to make sense of all this craziness. So we're going to dive into Fedora 31. It was just released a few days ago, and I'm going to be doing my usual review on certain aspects of each distro as it gets released. So I focus on a few things: features, user-friendliness out of the box, applications, stability, compatibility, and customizability. These are all things I feel that are most important to the most common set of users. That's just the general population. So that's the criteria, that's the things that we'll be focusing on in Fedora 31. So let's get started. First off, the features. This version of Fedora features the GNOME 3.34 desktop environment. That's the latest at the current moment that GNOME has to offer. So you're going to get all of the good features that come with this release. Things like a new updated background system where you can easily choose the background and the lock screen, a little bit more user-friendly, as well as other components, improved, say, sound settings here, so you can modify the sound settings. It's actually quite easier to work with, which is really awesome. Even changed alert sound. You can modify the volume changing sound if you don't like that, which is, I think, is awesome. You get things like the app folders feature, where if you want to combine things by left-clicking and dragging, and then it creates a new app folder. So sound and video just opened up, and now that's there. So taking something out of an app folder to, I guess, bring it back to normal. And there you go. So any other features on GNOME you'll be able to check out on GNOME's website at gnome.org, GNOME.org. And then Fedora 31 also comes with the latest Linux kernel that's available, 5.3.7. So those of you who have cutting-edge hardware or the latest NVIDIA cards or drawing tablets and even Wi-Fi adapters need not worry, because Fedora is equipped for everything. No, not everything. But you will get the latest compatibility with the most recent hardware because it is running the latest Linux kernel, of course, which is common to Fedora, and that's one of the things they tend to boast, is that they carry these latest features, which is fantastic. It also features the latest version of Firefox, Firefox version 70, which comes with a whole slew of upgrades, performance enhancements, and features all in and of itself. So browse the web happily and freely. And for those of us productivity and workhorses, we have the latest version of LibreOffice, the open source Office client, which I believe is version 6.3.2. And that comes with a bunch of great features in and of itself. Mainly, one of the things I enjoy is just even changing the interface to a tabbed interface, a more common and intuitive interface where you can have a lot more options and you can filter through them easily. So I love that about LibreOffice, and I use this stuff daily, both for home and for work purposes. So that's the gist of the new features. I want to get into my thoughts on user-friendliness out of the box. Fedora uses an unmodified version of the GNOME desktop. So as such, a lot of my critiques on user-friendliness is going to be about the GNOME desktop. First, let me talk about a few things that are a mixed bag. So the GNOME desktop itself, the GNOME shell, the GNOME interface, it's not for everyone. Now, there are people who love this change to high heaven. There are those who love pressing the window key or the super key and being able to search for their favorite apps or settings, or being able to change the background with just the quick type of a keyboard. and then being able to navigate with their up and down arrow keys and hitting enter to find the setting, the email that they want. That is one of the things that actually is a feature of user-friendliness, I think, is a bonus to GNOME, is that you can easily search for apps, files, documents, contacts, settings, emails, and even calendar entries. They're a breeze using this search method with your keyboard, and that's fantastic. Opening up applications quickly is great, and it puts you right to work, which is where you want to be. You want to be using the apps, and that's great. However, that being said that it's a nifty feature, there are still people who just don't like that method. They don't like to have to use the keyboard. They want to be able to have an applications menu out of the box, or they want to, especially for new users who aren't familiar with this desktop, and they're trying to find their way around. Now, GNOME has done a great job, and Fedora, of having a window appear the moment that they start their desktop, which is this window right here, this getting started window. And in it, they feature a couple of videos about the basics of using the GNOME desktop, and that's great. Things like launching applications. You can click on this, and there's a video with some tooltips that shows you just how to launch applications. So hovering your mouse up to the top left corner of the screen, and then selecting the applications button at the bottom, and then choosing it, or by using your keyboard to press the Command key on Macs, or the Super key or the Windows key on Windows-based keyboards, and then you just start typing. So type for whatever you want. Search for help, then press the Enter key, and there it is. So they make it easy to use, and hopefully the people who start this up for the first time, if they don't have a guide or someone who's helping them, that this will really alleviate the learning curve. This will smoothen things out and make it easier for people to understand. Especially things like switching tasks or using windows and workspaces, which can be a really confusing thought or really confusing idea for many first-time users. They've done a good job at changing this learning curve by adding these videos and adding some documentation. Now, that being said, just because they've alleviated the learning curve doesn't mean that this desktop metaphor or this interface is for everybody. Mainly users of like 2-in-1 laptops or touchscreens will enjoy this interface a lot more because they're using their finger half the time and not using a mouse. But for those of us who are using a mouse, and this is why it's a mixed bag, this isn't a positive or a negative, this topic, what I'm discussing, it's just kind of is. And if you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. For there are some people who don't want to have to move their mouse all the way down to the applications right here and then clicking that and then moving all the way to the right side of the screen just to scroll through and try to find the application that they're trying to use, or even through the left side and scrolling up and down. And then moving their mouse all the way around. It feels like it's just going everywhere. It feels like Star Trek at Warp 9 going, wah, like you just can't control where it's going, or you just have to go, like travel so far. So that can be an annoyance for some people, and that would be a very legitimate concern if they're primarily mouse users and they use the mouse and they're familiar with it and they like it. That would be a time when GNOME tends to be more of a chore than it is an enjoyable process to use. Okay, so moving on to a couple other elements. I'm going to start with the bad first, and then I'd like to end with the good. I like to end on a positive note because that's, it's good to be positive. We all like being positive, hopefully. So the software right out of the box, unlike the GNOME shell, when you're searching for emails or contacts or apps, searching in GNOME software is not always relevant. So immediately by pressing the looking glass icon or just by typing right away, you can begin to search for programs. Now let's say like I use Blender frequently. So if I search for Blender, Blender comes up and that's fantastic. And it shows right there in the window and I can easily install it. Very simple and easy to use. But if I'm a new user and I don't know any 3D graphics programs and I look for 3D graphics, well, guess what? In the search listing, I have things like LibreOffice Draw, Darktable, Image Viewer, I have GNOME, and others, Carbon, Inkscape, even though that some of these may pertain or have features that are 3D, one of the biggest and most popular open source 3D modeling programs, Blender, is nowhere to be found. So even in 3D graphics, so even if I was typing maybe, okay, 3D model might do it. Okay, well 3D model comes up. But again, you have to specifically know these kinds of terms, and sometimes you're just not finding the app you're looking for. Mainly another one, screen recorder. So only one screen recorder came up, and I know that there are plenty of others out there like Kazam or GTK Record My Desktop, like anything that's a screencast program, and nothing's showing up. Even my favorite video editor, Kdenlive, doesn't even show up in the search. So searching in software isn't intuitive, and that can be a problem because that can stop people from finding the programs that they want or they need in order to use their computer. Another small thing that annoys me that's kind of particular to the GNOME desktop is that it doesn't remember the window size or placement. So I find myself often after I open a program, I like to have it in the center of the screen or maximized because that's where I like to work. Now, I think it will memorize it if it's maximized, and if I close and reopen it, yeah, then it remembers whether it's maximized or not. But if I take it and if I put it down here, and let's just say for whatever reason, if I like it in the center of the screen, and I close this and I reopen it, well, and now it comes up over here and I have to move it over again. This is a small annoyance, but it is still a legitimate annoyance because it annoys me as a user. I like being able to put things where I can remember them, and there's no easy way in GNOME to be able to adjust that. Another negative I have to note on Fedora is that when you open up the GNOME Software Center, because you need additional software sources, also called repositories, in order to get some of the more popular programs that aren't available by default in Fedora, you have to add them manually, and adding them is honestly, for end users, it's a pain. It's a royal pain. There are things, you can click the menu here and go into software repositories, and then you can update a couple of these things by enabling or disabling them. Like out of the box, you can enable the RPM Fusion repository to get the NVIDIA drivers as well as Steam, which is a positive that I'm going to talk about later. But for getting RPM Fusion repositories to get the latest free and non-free software that isn't included by default in Fedora, you have to go over to their website and you have to go to rpmfusion.org, and then you have to, and again, I had to figure this out myself, that this was not an intuitive process, but I had to click on Enable RPM Fusion on your system, and then you had to figure out, okay, there are two different repositories, there's the free and the non-free, and you had to do this for get the free for Fedora 31, and then it opens up and has you download a package, an RPM package, which you can either save or run, and then you go into your files, downloads, double click this, it opens up in software, and then you can install it. Now, I've already installed this and gone through this process, but I'm trying to illustrate the fact that if somebody was a new user or they were new to this system and they just needed something to work out of the box, let's say they needed Kdenlive by default, or they needed OBS Studio, or even VLC Media Player, which is a hugely popular media player. But it's not available by default in Fedora. And so in order to get that, they either have to go to VLC's website and they can download it from there. But even then, after that, this is the process that they go through. So Fedora 22 and later, to download VLC outside of the Software Center, you have to open up a terminal and type in all these commands. For many end users, this is going to be confusing. And they're going to have to learn how to use the terminal and what these commands are before they do this. So again, I'm talking about user-friendliness. This process is not as user-friendly as most people would encounter if they were trying to download something from Windows. for this same program, if they were trying to get this on Windows, well then guess what? It opens up a new window and you click on download and it downloads the program and you can install it straight to your machine. That's how it would work in Windows. But this process for Fedora is way more complicated for a lot of users. And they don't understand that first you're actually adding the RPM Fusion repository. They don't know that. There's no way that they're going to know that. And you can't expect them to. The point is the experience is going to frustrate them. And they're going to end up probably not using this program at all, or just trying to find another distro that is easier to use out of the box. So that's a negative for a user interface, the fact that they have to go through this process. Maybe instead, if software had an option just like it does here for RPM Fusion to be enabled, but the entirety of the repository, not just for the NVIDIA driver or for Steam. Let's say they give the user the option to. Well, that way they're still, if they have it disabled by default, and then the moment that you get the prompt in the beginning to enable third-party repositories, if you choose to enable it, well then it enables RPM Fusion and gives you access to all of the latest and greatest popular software that isn't included on Fedora by default. That would have been at least a user-friendly compromise I think would have been more appealing to users. So another big negative is, especially for me in the media industry, in the marketing and advertising industry, I do a lot of digital media, and playing videos and MP3 files or any type of media that has a proprietary codec is a royal pain. Again, if I double clicked it, now I already installed the third-party codec so that I could use these and watch my videos, or that I could go and play an MP3 file, and now it'll play. It's not going to give me an error. But in the beginning, once I loaded this up right out of the box, it wouldn't play my MP4 files or my MP3 files or even my MKV files, a Matroska file. And it wouldn't do it. And so the fact that there was no way to enable these third-party codecs out of the box is a big user-friendly issue, because that's just yet another thing that users have to do in order to search online for a feature that they were either expecting or hoping would be available by default. And then they have to go through the process of figuring that out. So while the fact that help is here and available is awesome, remember, part of user-friendliness is that it's friendly, it's easy. And having to spend time to use features that you've gotten used to as a standard because it's been available by other competing platforms is going to be a huge detriment in user-friendliness. Okay, so now that's enough of the bad. So now that some of the good things. Again, one of the biggest positives that I see to this interface and to GNOME and to Fedora is the ability to search for anything. So the ability to get, as they put, to get help. And you can immediately just type it in, press enter, or you could search for calendar entries or email, and you can even look for additional software. And even the ability to modify your search in the search listing here by going into the search option in the system settings. That's fantastic. So you can choose what you want to see and what you don't want to see. So that's one of the best features, in my opinion, about the GNOME desktop, and it's super handy. One of the other features I found that's great is that software does, in fact, have this available by default, that you can enable non-free NVIDIA drivers so that you can, if you have NVIDIA cards on your laptop or your desktop, you can get them running. And if you play games, if you play PC games and you have a Steam account, that you can get Steam easily by enabling a third-party repository and then searching for Steam and then installing it straight from there. Or the same with your NVIDIA drivers. If you want to search for NVIDIA and you go down to accelerated graphics driver, and you can install it from there. So the fact that they're available and they are easier to access now than they've ever been in Fedora is a huge positive in my book. Another great thing, that even if searching for software isn't always as intuitive from the search field, using these categories here below, they are an easy way to try to find the programs you're looking for, the apps you're trying to install. So even looking in audio video and being able to look at to show and filter them by audio creation or editing or music players, and being able to see the programs available below is very handy. And also gives you a good chance to explore the free software options that are out there. There's many great programs out there that some people don't even know about. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to applications. First, the bad. As I said a little bit earlier, the default repositories, the default software sources in Fedora are lacking many popular apps. And this is by design, but it is still a detriment. It's still a negative to me. So things like VLC Media Player or Kdenlive or even screencasting apps, there's a lot to be desired here. And it usually requires users to go out and search for the software they're looking for instead of having one nice, easy, user-friendly place to go. Another big problem is even though things like Kdenlive don't show up in the software center, if I was to open up a terminal and I was to try to install Kdenlive, well, it just so happens to show up right there. And if I press enter, then sure enough, the Kdenlive package gets recognized. So even though there are applications that are available, they're not showing up in the software center, which is a big concern I have. Again, for new users and for users who just out of the box want to have accessibility for the softwares that they're trying to use. So one of the positive things I do have to say about the applications is that there is a minimal list of default applications that are available out of the box, which I know that's very handy for a lot of users, that they can save on storage space by just having a minimal set of apps. The fact that it doesn't come with a lot of software that, hey, this might be cool, but I'm not going to use this, I think is a good thing that Fedora offers that. There's a lot of distros out there that provide a lot of bloatware or just a lot of things that take up your storage space on your computer that you're probably never even going to use. So I'm glad that they take a little bit of a utilitarian approach as far as keeping a minimal list of default applications that are installed after you install Fedora 31. Now I'm going to move on to stability, which, I'll be honest, for many, many releases for many years has been a huge gripe of mine because a lot of releases have had a lot of bugs and just haven't worked out of the box. In this case, there were a couple of issues that I ran into in stability, but thankfully they were just initially. So the introductory wizard didn't connect to the Wi-Fi properly, and I was able to get through the introduction wizard or the guide and to connect to the Wi-Fi straight from the GNOME desktop, which was great, but the fact that it wasn't working during the setup guide would have been nice. Another small negative is that it didn't initially recognize my default sound device, so this was showing right here to the Samsung G-Track Pro, which was my mic, my audio recorder, and I had to choose the line out in order to play to the speakers. This is a very small thing, but still it's kind of an annoying thing that it wasn't detecting my speakers, my right sound system out of the box. And then the negative I have on compatibility is mainly in the extensions. So if I go to add-ons and I go to shell extensions, many of these just don't work out of the box. Now, for those who don't know, what these are user-created modifications to the GNOME desktop, to the GNOME shell here. So people who want to do things like, let's say, add features like an applications menu. So someone designed and coded an applications menu that just showed up in the top left here. And you can left-click this, and now instead of searching in the overview, you have a much more traditional menu system that allows you to get to your applications. But this is not a part of GNOME. It does not come with GNOME by default, but this is something someone created in order to add that feature. So these are all extensions created by other users that are trying to enhance the usability of GNOME or change a feature to more suit their desires. This is one of the benefits of open source software, is that users can help change things. That being said, some of these, and many of them in fact, just don't work. The activities configurator, which is a very popular way to modify the top panel up here, when I installed it and tried to change the settings, if I go to extension settings, well, it doesn't show up. It doesn't show activities configurator anywhere. So even though it's installed, I still can't use it because it's not around. The fact that I'm not able to use a lot of these extensions because they don't work is, it's pretty disappointing. So on the plus side, my drawing tablet was recognized flawlessly. So even opening up an art program like Krita, right now I'm using my drawing tablet and I'm able to do my artwork, which is fantastic. Which brings me to my final subject, customizability. And this is one where, in my opinion, GNOME shines the least. This is where things really start to go downhill. Mainly because, aside from changing the background and the lock screen, there is no customization out of the box. Right away, none of these settings will allow you to customize the appearance or even customize the top bar or even adjust the top bar for people like me who want to make the full use of my desktop and my window space. I can't even auto-hide the top bar without needing to hopefully find some extension out there that actually does work and make modifications to GNOME's behavior. Because GNOME's interface isn't designed for everyone, and they don't make it easy to understand user-created extensions right away, users who don't like the default behavior will get frustrated quickly. Things like, I use Dropbox a lot, and without having extensions like Top Icons Plus, which I would have no idea what this would do just judging by the name, but I know from experience that this is going to give me a tray up here at the top that I can see Dropbox in. Without that, I'm not able to manage Dropbox, which is a huge problem for me because I use the cloud and I use Dropbox services really often. So the fact that I can't customize that, and I get the GNOME developers decided to remove that as a feature because they didn't find it useful. Well, guess what? Me as a user, I did find it useful. And I can't, assuming if this didn't work for some reason, just like activities configurator, I would be up a creek. There would be no way for me to use Dropbox without having to get used to the terminal commands, which seems kind of silly considering that KDE Plasma and Cinnamon and even the Ubuntu version of GNOME has these features by default because they recognize that users want them. So that's one of the biggest things about customizability in Fedora 31 and GNOME that's really difficult for me personally, because there are no customization options and the process to customize is a pain, unreliable, and often confusing, including having to download and install the GNOME Tweaks application. If this was installed by default, that would be great, but you have to download and install this in order to even change GNOME. And in here, once you're in here, which is great because you now have customization options, and I'm glad that they're there, you can get a dark theme and you can change the cursor and you can manage extensions here, including even change things about the top bar. And again, you change window placement if you wanted to, whatever. I'm glad that they're here, but I really wish that these were included by default. So that being said, for those of us who want more customization options out of the box or want to be able to modify our desktop to make it suit our needs, we can go to Fedora's website And Fedora does offer different spins or different versions of their operating system. If you prefer an alternative desktop environment, such as KDE Plasma or XFCE, you can download a Fedora spin for your preferred desktop environment and use that to install Fedora. So clicking Learn More, and you'll see that there are different spins or different versions that have different desktops. So if you want Fedora, instead of GNOME having the KDE Plasma desktop, you can click on this and scroll down, and you can download and install that version onto your computer. Or if you want Fedora with the XFCE desktop, and you can download from there. So thankfully, you do have choices. And I'm glad that they included these options for users like me who really just want to make Linux my own and offer configuration options out of the box. So to summarize, as far as the distro goes, this is easily their best release that has featured the GNOME 3 desktop. For technical users and enthusiasts, this will likely be a warm welcome for you and offer the latest and greatest of the open source universe. For us non-technical users, media producers, and everyday folk who don't want to rely heavily on the keyboard to navigate, or for those who don't want to tinker with your desktop as much and just want it to work to perform your daily tasks and use your apps, I would probably recommend a different Linux distro, or at least a different spin of Fedora, something with KDE's Plasma desktop, or more likely just trying a few other options to see if there's something that suit your needs better. And if you've installed Fedora 31 and tried it for yourself, let me know in the comments section below what your thoughts are. What was your experience? Was it the best distro you've ever experienced, or did it make you want to pull your hair out trying to figure things out? Whatever your experience, all comments are good. Just keep it friendly and helpful because we're here to help each other. So that's my review of Fedora 31. I appreciate you watching. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more, hit subscribe so you can watch more videos from Free Your Mind delivered right to you. Until next time, take care and stay free.